Welcome to Conversations with Svend. This teamwork podcast initiative is offering expert insights and guidance in areas such as relating, conscious sexuality, money, prosperity, abundance, and healing. We also dive deeply into the benefits of nature for mental health and emotional well-being. Along these themes, I'm creating a dedicated space for Gene Keys conversations and guidance. Today we're featuring Tanmayo, head of the Ambassadors and Guides. She'll be sharing wisdom on finding true purpose, breaking through barriers, and deepening into knowing of who we truly are. This is a conversation around Tanmayo's 3 vocational loves. Welcome to this space that I'm creating, which is called the Gene Keys Conversations and Guidance. Today I have Tanmayo, who in many ways do not need a presentation or introduction because she is world famous already. However, she is one of the very prominent members of the Gene Keys leadership team. She is, of course, the head of the ambassadors and the guides worldwide. And she is also a many-time host of the Venus sequence. And on the Bribie Island of the east coast of Australia, and I'm here in West Wales. Today we want to talk about the 3 loves, the 3 vocational loves of Tanmayo, which are integral touch, facial harmony, then the Gene Keys and human design, and then Satori-style retreats. Also want to dive into the mysteries of the Gene Keys in the form we want to talk about the 13th Gene Key, which has the gift of discernment. And we want to speak about the 43rd Gene Key, which has the gift of insight. We may touch on the 7th Gene Key as well, that has the gift of guidance. Let's see how we get on. Thank you so much, Tanmayo, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Wow, that's quite an introduction. So if there's new people listening in, then they don't know who I am at all. So thank you for that beautiful introduction. Perhaps it's easy to say I've just been around a long time, um, with Gene Keys. And when we talk about loves, Svend was very keen to interview me according to what these 3 vocational loves are. So the Gene Keys obviously looms very prominent in that, but at the same time, I can't say that anyone touches my heart more deeply than any others. They're just diff different paths up the silver mountain, shall we say that, and shine lights on these multifaceted crystalline natures of being. And somewhere along the journey, like many of us, I'm just going to say us, I'm sure there's more than me, we study all kinds of things, So at some point during, I guess, the harmonic in 1987, for me, it was just like this huge wake-up call. It's not that it hadn't been there before, this awareness, or lots of interesting things had happened in my life. But during that transit in 87, it was just like this clarion call, as if this big bell rang in my life. And I know that happened for many others at that time. And it was like, oh, there's work to do. And I didn't know what that even meant. I just knew there's work to do. And suddenly I was like this. There's a little movie that you may or may not have seen. It's quite old now, but then, I've been in the body a few years also. So it's a little movie that has a little robot, and it's called Short Circuit. And there's this little robot's alive. And there's this little quote that's, oh, number 5's alive. And then he has to find out lots of things. And I felt like him, like he was doing this massive study. He would be studying the whole library. And I felt like, I'm in this in the bookstore and I've got five books on the go at once, and I would walk past a bookstore and it would be like a book called to me. But what I realized over time is that they were resonating with aspects of being within my frame of reference, sometimes connecting me with, we could call it past lives, future lives, interdimensional realities. Some people, I don't care if it's, some people prefer to talk about ancestral memory. So for me, I don't need to call it one thing above another thing. I just had very deep experiences. So it started with suddenly I was attracted to workshops, and I had been meditating off and on for years before then, but and I had read of all kinds of books up until that point, but I hadn't really recognized that it was a call to awakening, when I was reading things like Vivekananda and, I had all of these beautiful books from India and Alice Bailey. And I think I was in my 20s when I picked up The Secret Doctrine, from Helena Blavatsky. And I think I read it and read it and read it and had no idea why I was reading it. I would read a whole 2 or 3 pages and I would sit there and go, what did I just read? I don't know what any of that means. So the next day I would go back again. So it was kind of this very strange labor of love that somehow on some level was opening things in me, but on a deeper layer than me being able to consciously know what it was all about. And the same was, with Annie Besant and some of the old mystics, shall we say, from the 19th century that were all involved in mystery schools. And those books kind of just seemed to fall in my lap. But then in 87, it was different. It was like, oh, this is important. I need to wake up in a different way. Something came to consciousness. And that started a journey of inquiry that led me to different groups and studying many things, body work and kinesiology and counseling. And, I was in all kinds of group family systems and um, you name it. And I was finding out what this is all about. And of course, it started to open deeper layers of a realization of what conditioning is. And that the question had arisen in me, tell me who you are and who am I? Who am I without being somebody's mother, sister, lover, friend, daughter? All of these labels sort of like started to appear in front of my eyes, like, well, what is that? And why do I have 2 spoons of sugar in my coffee? It went from the smallest little things to this realm of inquiry. But maybe to continue on from there, at a very young age, I was always fascinated by faces.
Right.
Faces really were, I remember very clearly being 7 years old and standing by my father and being really curious as to, it seemed that people spoke words, but what I saw in their face and what I felt were different things. It felt like there was no alignment with what I was feeling, what I was seeing, and what I was hearing. And that was very disturbing and quite curious. And there were certain moments that I remember looking at my father and him, it's like he looked at me as if this is a very precocious child, and sometimes I would ask questions and be hushed, shh, you're not supposed to ask those things. And it led me to when I was 16, I saw one of those, those heads that have all of the writing on them that's phrenology. And people would study that you had all of these things on this skull, on this head. And I was totally fascinated by that. I went, oh, look at this. And suddenly it was like it opened up some idea of a blueprint. And I started researching, and discovered that, Aristotle had written a whole physiognomonica about faces. And then, I started to look at Commedia dell'arte, and that people used to walk around in Europe with masks so that people couldn't see their structure and their faces. And I thought, what is this? So that started another inquiry that led me to personology and to um, a man called Daniel Whiteside, who worked with Gordon Stokes in a certain type of kinesiology, but his father had done a big study on facial structure and how you are structured to function and what are the stressors around this structure that is in your face. But not only that, how it moves and changes when you're speaking to someone else. So I might look in the mirror and see a certain structure, and we could call it that kind of whatever, productive style. But then suddenly I could be with somebody who has more of it. So they have more cells attributed to that structure and its function. So they become more prominent in that field in that moment. So it was quite fascinating to me. And I started to see how how it operated very much in those days, forgive me, and today that wouldn't be appropriate, but there was kind of gender issues that could easily be identified. Um, but more today, I would say issues that maybe were more feminine, more masculine, and how they appeared in a person, and how these types would be attracted to each other, and then how they would get in trouble because of that very attraction ultimately would be really difficult for them to bridge. There were these polarities that they had. And that led me to wanting to work on faces. So I met a man called Stanley Rosenberg in London in 1990, and I studied with him. Stanley was an extraordinary being. He's left the body now. But at that time, it was very clear to me that how I wanted to work was not exactly the same way as he was working with his teaching. So I had sent him an email to say, Stanley, I kept trying to invite him to Australia and it never worked out. And eventually I sent him a fax. I didn't send him an email. We didn't have any in those days. I sent him a fax and said, I think this is not working because I am actually not working in the way that I learned from you, that your teachings are very powerful in me, but how I am feeling it and working with it is not the same. And I received a lovely fax back because at that time there was only him and his wife doing this work. And he said, whatever it is that you're doing, I support you. So, and I still have that fax, which was very important to me, that I had honored the source. And so I created a whole body of work from that original experience that I had with Stanley. And I'm still teaching that in different countries. And it's very dear to my heart. And for me, it's a way to work with the body that takes us beyond the stress patterns. It's working deeply with the autonomic nervous system and, of course, with the vagus nerve, the cranial nerves, and allowing the body to deeply relax into a place where the purity of being starts to have spaciousness. But in the groups, we have a threefold structure. So I present a piece. The participants do a contemplation and inquiry into whatever that is for them. Just two or three of them together. And I always ask that they keep eye contact. So there is, for many people in the beginning, that's like, wow, and years ago, I had women say to me, I haven't looked in my partner's eyes for as long as I'm doing this here because it's a deeply intimate experience. Whereas today it's pretty normal in many places around the world. But in those days it was quite, it was a new idea that we were going to actually be really connected eye to eye and heart to heart and exploring something that would open doors for us. And then we would do the body work that is all it's balance. It's first of all starts with on the belly and some belly breath, but it's very much about opening up the facial mask, and allowing the stress patterns that are being held very deeply, in the jaw and all around the eyes, all these little muscles that are constantly being impacted. And of course, work all the way through the head and the meridians and the nerves and the zones. And the result is, well, the feedback I get again and again is that the spaciousness that is felt, and there's a softening and a melting and more of a connection with an embodied presence. And again, I hear people say, "Oh, I didn't know how much I thought my feelings." So that's I guess we could call that my first vocational love is that the face is a blueprint and accessing those deeper levels of stressful patterns and trauma through working in this very gentle, sensitive way that also has a rhythm to it that allows the body to deeply relax. And it's a process of non-interference. It's purely presence and the connection that happens between practitioner and client until there's only one of us here actually. There is such a deep experience that happens in this quiet solitude with this gentle technique with no interference, no interpretation, just no interference, just simply being there present with the other and allowing the intelligence of that body and that being to unfold and unwind however is needed for them. And that was always very important to me. That's a lot. Mm. So that was the first vocational. When I saw Stanley working on a face in 1990 in London at the Complementary Health Show, I kind of was stood in the middle of an aisle and I just knew, oh, that's my work. It's an extraordinary experience. And what I saw was there was a man standing there, with his hands on a face, but I was transported into a different realm and I could see myself at another space of time. And there were all of these colors and streams of consciousness. And I was part of a team. This was the what I was given, the channeling, if you like, that came through. I was downloading streams of consciousness, coding. I was downloading coding into what would become human form. And this time I was being asked to release the conditioning so that that beloved being could find their own coding that was their essential presence within the body. And it all happened in, just a few seconds standing there in that huge collection of people in London. And everything in me knew, oh, that's my work. And yeah, and it still is. I've just come back from Japan recently, and we have different classes, introductory class, a middle class, a 7-day class, and then there's some advanced classes too. But I love it. It's just beautiful. So that's the first love. So any any questions or feedback, or I feel like I'm the only one talking here.
Well,
Too much.
no, no, I'm listening. I'm listening. Yeah, I met Stanley Rosenberg myself, and I was very, very taken by him. Really beautiful, beautiful
Mhm.
being. Um, Yeah, I studied myself. I studied emotional freedom techniques and matrix reimprinting, and we had a it was a men's group actually. It was called the Matrix Knights.
Nice.
And there was a gentleman there. He spoke about this accessing the healing powers to the vagus nerve book
Mm.
that Stanley Rosenberg wrote, and it's also an audio book. And I downloaded it, and I was very galvanized. At that time, I was studying body work and massage, and then my
Mm.
school friend Karina, she said, "Oh, I know him. He lives in Denmark." And I sent her a message, and I don't think he's very computer literate like he was. So I didn't get a reply. But then when I went back to Denmark, I called him up and he just said, come over. And I went over to Copenhagen and he said, you've done quite a lot of meditation, haven't you? Because you're very present. And that was kind of the affirmation. I was also, before I knew about contemplation as a,
Mm.
Gene Keys practice, I was studying that book, The King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover, the archetypes of the masculine, and contemplating those. And within that, there is this need for a man to have validation from other men. And I felt very much that there was this was before I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD, actually. But I always knew that yeah. Anyway, it's a long journey, but I was diagnosed with autism, ADHD in university anyway. But now yeah, I found it was a profound meeting. I really felt that he was such an intuitive, such a present being. And I also loved his whole story because at that time I call it acting as an actor. I reframed my acting career, but I was working within the film and television industry, and it was interesting how his journey was that he had come from being an actor and then living in Denmark and not knowing the language and then going into body work. I thought it was quite a profound meeting. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, there's quite a lot there. There's quite a lot to tune into. Uh, I think that's the beautiful thing about this space, and that you are known for the gene keys, but there's so much other things, so we can have a broad spectrum appeal in the sense that we can hear more about all of you, kind of.
Thank you. I guess for me, the biggest thing is that it's there's a kind of something complete about integral touch. We're touching each other in all kinds of ways. And it's good to remember this was in 1990, 91 that this was happening. And then I started giving the first classes and the way that they were moving in me. And I could always sense this thing that I felt that it would, of course, with me, I had difficulty being really vulnerable or intimate, or, and those questions were already arising in me. And I felt like I lived in a world that dismissed feelings, and that on top of feelings was all of this emotion, all of this melodrama. But underneath, I felt like there's an ocean of wisdom in here. And I felt we can access it through the body, but also through some very sensitive practice with each other, by opening a field of inquiry, but then just leaving it for each person to explore that for themselves, and just noticing, like maybe on day one and day two, it's very, on the very superficial. Everybody's kind of just putting their little feet in the water. I mean, and this is a long time ago now. This was, I mean, if I had called that trauma therapy or whatever at the time, everybody would have thought, what on earth, and run for the hills. Or maybe not everybody, but this is common in our world now. Um, and the beauty of the work, of course, is that you get to look great because although, you know, you get a natural facelift, if you like, which was very appealing. I mean, much as most of us might not like to admit it, I think there is a little bit of vanity there for we like to look the best that we can. And this is a way to really access those stress patterns that start to, etch into the face and tell a story, which is beautiful, but we don't need to wear the stress of it. So that was kind of how I wanted to approach the work, was from this very sensitive, emotionally emotional entrance in a way that allowed a contemplation, well, inquiry, I didn't use the word contemplation, allowed this inquiry that started to penetrate a little bit deeper, once the first layer of the was, disappearing, and then suddenly there was, as we talked, there was something that was penetrating a little bit deeper and revealing something that needed to come to the light of day and make space. So I like the threefold nature of it, if you like. It's gone um, from the inquiry to this real dyads and connecting with each other, keeping eye contact and being open-hearted and being willing to receive without interference. I think it's pretty easy to see how that's been translated into the community calls that we have in Gene Keys, but how it would be if we could just receive each other without all of the conditioned nodding in the right place and smiling in the right place and, oh yeah, me too, all this very social behavior that we depend on. But how do I come to know my own sovereignty if I'm always dependent on the other for validation or confirmation? It's a little bit like, you're giving somebody else the TV channel box and they're clicking the box and there's a reaction. I started to notice that in my relationship with my ex-husband. I thought, I'm like this little reactor field. He says la la la, and I'm noticing the reactions. And so that was also part of how I started to get into inquiry and see what is happening here and where are the drama hooks and what is this? And it can't all just be about present time. So it opened a lot of doors to um, a very gentle way of healing that I liked.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then of course we have um yeah, I met Richard, which I think many people have heard about. In 2004 when Venus was transiting. I was living in Cologne. And I'd been, teaching in various countries and living in Australia, and then through work that I was doing with Faisal Muhadin, which is the Diamond Logos teachings, which is it came from like the Ridwan school with Hamid Almas. Um, they were partners and they kind of parted ways because they wanted to explore these particular Sufi style teachings in a different way. Um, and so I had ended up being going to Italy sometimes twice a year or once a year for like 8 or 10 years. And then through meeting friends there, decided to live in Cologne for a while. But I'd been working in Germany like twice a year for about 14 years, giving these classes in integral touch, facial harmony. Um, but in 2004, I was writing a workshop for my work, a workshop called Heart Connection. And I just had this sense that that Venus energy landed somewhere. And I drove everybody crazy about what is this? And eventually somebody gave me this little blue book that was the circuitry book, Richard's circuitry book. And friends were saying, oh, Tanmayo, it's human design. We told you. I said, no, it's not human design. It's this guy. So I found him on the internet and sent a message and started a little dialogue just before he gave his first Venus sequence group. And I flew to London and traveled to Devon. I think the group was maybe in Somerset or somewhere. I was the only person there that didn't know anybody. And people would say, well, how did you find us? And I said, I followed the energy, so, yeah, at that time there were certainly a few sideways glances because I hadn't been involved in human design. I hadn't been involved in any of those things. But there was something about that Venus energy in 2004. It sort of, I had the sense of it somewhere. And that's how I found Richard. And he was teaching at that time also with Werner Pitzal, and they are going to release Integral Human Design next year. And I have worked with Werner also with Integral Human Design, which is really extraordinary, beautiful work. And that was a long time ago. So, how it's going to be presented now from these two very mature men will be very beautiful. So, as soon as Richard started talking, first of all, I felt everything light up in my body. And there was a kind of resistance, like, no, I don't want anything else. I'm happy with what I've got. There was that kind of, oh no, there's more sort of thing. But everything in me knew that this man is seated. I could tell he's absolutely seeded. This is whatever this is, it's for the future. And I just felt like every part of me knew it. It was like coming home to something that is so well known in me that there was just no question about it whatsoever. And, there was no book and no internet program and no profile and no anything at that time. But there was just no question. And then I stayed in contact. And then in 2007, he sent me an email and he said, "Come to London. I'm going to do the Pearl. I'm offering the Pearl, presenting the Pearl." Okay. So I go to London and, my crew, my network, because I came back so full of Venus and wanting to share what I learned in London. And at that time, there were no sequences, sorry, in Devon with Venus, and years before. There was no sequences like there are now. It was like all on one sheet of paper, that illumination, the clarity from Richard with his 57 and all those gifts he had came later to see that these were actually three different sequences. So I went to London and spent the weekend there in this group. And I came back and my friend said, "Wow, come on, tell us what was that about?" And I said, "I don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea what I just did." I mean, I felt like I was walking around London looking at branding. And it's where I connected very deeply with an ambassador friend called Martha Cuffey, who lives in London. And she also had connected with Richard and had a session with him in 2004. But we didn't actually meet and really connect until the Pearl in London. We've been friends ever since. And then I didn't know anything. And when we're presenting the pearl, and you've maybe heard Richard say this many times, you can't activate the pearl. It's like you work with all of what's around it. And even more fully if you're grounded in the activation sequence, with your life work and your evolution and radiance and purpose, and that's your ground of being. The activation is the very much your physical world ground of being that allows you some stability when you open up into the flowering of the Venus sequence, which is emotional body. And we've moved from that very purposeful personal activation into partnerships and relating, and all of the collective conditioning that's been laid down, not only in womb life, the three trimesters are aligning with star energy actually, and with these 64 keys, these archetypes are already taking shape within that 9 months. And then we start to follow it in the Venus of how we've been conditioned, physically and emotionally and mentally. Not anybody's fault. This is just the evolution of humanity. So, but at some point, if we're lucky, I feel, first of all, we have to survive. That's the most important thing. We have to survive our childhood and our culture and our teenage years and all the things that go on until in some moment that question arises. Maybe the question is, who am I? But maybe there's just something where there's more to this maybe it's your relationship that caused you your first contemplations, or your job, or your family, or a death, or a breakup, but something creates that first question in the seeker that wants to know more. So that was just so potent for me. But in the pearl sequence, like all of those things allow an even more full experience of the prosperity of your vocation and what you're giving to the world in the pearl sequence, which is mental body. But lots of people want to jump in there because it's about prosperity, which is great. That's the world we've been living in. Tell me how to make more money. How do I prosper? But the more deeply that we explore Venus, the more possibility there is for this flowering of the prosperity in the pearl. And I was actually teaching a workshop on facial. It was called oh, what was it called? Oh, it doesn't matter. But anyway, it was about all the face work. I was teaching in Vienna, and a 3-day class on all the structure and its function. And it's kind of fun also. I mean, it's not only just deep, but the shadows, of course, are also there, but they're not really shadows more than stress patterns that capture us, where we're not able to live the fullness of the gifts that we are. And of course, choice always precedes structure and its function. But first of all, we need some awareness of that. And I was walking down a little street coming back from lunch. I'd gone off by myself, needing just some time for me. And all of a sudden, I just felt this pearl drop. And it was like a physical experience of like what you see on TV in New York when the ball drops in New Year. It was like, wow, this is the pearl. And I think because of the nature of what I had been presenting in those 2 years previously, it had just been working in me. And suddenly I thought, oh, this is what that is. But I couldn't have explained it to anybody else for 2 years. It was like, I know I went there, I've done something, it's in me, but I have no way to express it whatsoever. So that was kind of a beautiful mystical experience. And then Richard sent me another email and said, "Hey, we're going to do some on the first online retreats." That was, I think, 2009 and 10. The first book was created in 2009. It was the first 1,000 copies of his Gene Keys book. Um, and so for 2 years in a row, we did deep dives into the activation sequence with Maestro was the platform at the time. And he rang people that he knew and to ask if they would be the guides. And then he asked Martha and Werner and I if we would mentor what was happening in the field, which we said yes and did. And of course, I got to know lots of people during that time. And then I think it was in 2011 was his first retreat in California, called Corpus Christi, which was heavenly, just absolutely, completely heavenly. And you started to get a sense of the work, beginning to the roots were really going deep. And you could imagine the mycelium then, because things were already happening in Bulgaria and Romania and places around the world. And then, blah, blah, blah. Here we are today, with all that's happening now, with all of these books that he's written and still writing. And he's recently, been on Gaia TV, did the whole Golden Path series on Gaia, which anybody can find if they want. And um, then, it has become very clear to us that starting in January 26, we're about to do the whole Golden Path for 18 months. We're having this extremely amazing, if for me, it's like an invitation from the field. It feels like existence herself has said, hey, you guys, we all need to be together and contemplate together. And the power of that in a retreat space is, it's exponential to what happens when you're on your own. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think it is. It's like there's a magnetism to us all coming together. So we're going to start with the activation sequence in January. And, there's 4 months of activation, and there's a month off, and in that month off we'll have at least one webinar that bridges, from purpose in activation to purpose in Venus. And then we'll have 6 months of Venus and a month off, and a one webinar in the middle, and then 4 months of Pearl, which is going to take us right up into 27. And for those of you who are aware of, this change of, we have these overlighting incarnation crosses, shall we say, and they're where the cross is about to shift from the cross of planning into the cross of the sleeping phoenix in 2027. And that's a big shift as to what is actually being activated on the planet and to see what happens then. I mean, it's not going to be, oh, we're all enlightened, but it's a new day that might bring us even deeper challenges in the beginning, but there are extraordinary opportunities held in that. So I feel that those of us, we're already signed up for the journey. I mean, I just can't think of anything I'd rather do with my life than be completely dedicated to this 18 months of inquiry and contemplation, and to be doing it with such an amazing group of people from around the world, known and unknown, of how many will eventually join us. So we'll have the path structure that we often follow, so that we have the banks to our river, but we have lots of new things that have been created, and lots of space for different faces and voices of guides and ambassadors to be seen, and have an opportunity to share their living wisdom. So we're very excited about that. And Richard's really on fire with it, which is gorgeous. He's just totally in. And of course, he's just completed his new book, The Sage. So he will be sharing parts of that in the field. And, it's an invitation for us all into our own sage. So, to come to see ourselves as these sacred humans and these mystical beings that are here in this very practical embodied form at the same time. So that's kind of how I encountered Richard and Gene Keys, and here we all still are.
And what about the
Mhm.
third vocational love? Can you bring that in?
Well, some years ago, like a curious thing actually, well, some years ago in the mid 90s, I went through what I first of all thought was a dark night of the soul. And I had I had been doing a lot of work and a lot of meditation, but um I was divorced, and then we had got back together, my ex and I got back together, and then it was clear that it wasn't it's just he needed to live an incarnation and I needed to live mine, and they were very, very different. And so we parted again, and I felt very much like I don't know what I'm doing. It's like I had lost the deeper connection to meditation, or I was just very depressed. And I had also, if I talked about it in a Gene Keys sense, I would say that sixth line, the sixth line being I'd had enough. It's like, you know what, I'm done. It's all too awful and disappointing, and I don't know how to go on from here. And I didn't know how to bridge the love I had for my husband and with what I was exploring in my life. And it was just a very vulnerable, sad time for me. And I was also part of a meditation circle that I'd been in for about 4 or 5 years. And they were just a fabulous group. And I just said, look, I'm at the point of writing letters to everybody. I mean, I'm in this particular drama of I'm out of here. I've had enough. It's too disappointing. This is, I'm done. And I had lots of sessions on this, what on earth is going on with me. I had different kinds of sessions from different people, and nothing seemed to really shift it. And I asked myself, well, maybe you're not willing for it to be different. And that didn't seem to shift it. Or I asked myself, well, what is it you're tired of? I would play these games with me. And then one day I thought, I have an old friend who's a priest. And actually, he left the priesthood after something like 32 years. Well, let me rephrase that. He didn't leave the priesthood, he left the Catholic Church. He said he could no longer adhere to a lot of what was happening. But he was so authentic. And I watched him, in his life go through periods where there was a deep attraction and an intimacy that could have gone somewhere that would break his vows of celibacy and put him into an inquiry of what is celibacy. There was nothing that went amiss from him. And I rang him and I said, look, I'm in a horrible ditch. Can I come and visit? He said, of course. So I went to see him and we sat together and shared. And he said, nobody can help you because they don't understand where you are. You're in a personal crucifixion and you're trying to fix it with psychology and it can't be fixed there. And that just broke everything open. It was just like this huge watershed of trying. I was looking, it's crazy when I think back now, but it was just like this whole new flowering, this just big opening happened. And maybe, I don't know, a few months later, I was sitting in my house and I'd been meditating. And this happened in various places to me, but this is one of them. I opened my eyes and I saw this being in the corner of the room, and I realized, oh, that's Osho. And I knew it was Osho, but I didn't know so much about what it meant. Although I had friends that had these interesting names, but it hadn't penetrated somewhere for me. And for those of you who have a second line, especially if it's in design, in radiance and purpose, I am very much that blind natural that has no idea what she's doing until suddenly it's like hits me on the nose and then I realize what it is. And he looked at me and he said, come to Pune. And I said, oh no, you're going to give me one of those ridiculous, unpronounceable names. And as I said it, and immediately as I was saying the words, I was in formless form. And I watched him realize, oh, she's in formless form. And he just looked at me and he said, come to Pune. And I just knew I would go. So I went to Pune and I didn't know much about Rajneesh or the ranch or the stories or the Rolls Royces. I didn't know anything about that time. I just knew I was going to Pune. And I got there and pretty much it was clear that there was a lot of energy around sexuality. So I got myself in a tantra group, which was great. But I thought this is not what I'm here for. This is great. And it was provocative and liberating in different ways. But I thought this is not it. And then in the community there's this little booklet that's produced that tells you all the workshops that are on for that week. And I just saw this word, Satori. Now, I had already been in India in 1991 and I'd spent 20 days in Vipassana. So, but I'd never heard of this. What is this? But I just knew as soon as I saw the word, that's what I'm doing here. And you have to go for an interview if you want to do a group in the ashram or in, I don't know what it's called now. It's not called the commune and it's not called an ashram. I think it's called a resort or what meditation resort these days. You have to have an interview with whoever the group leaders are because they need to know who you are and are you prepared for this group or what is your purpose for being there. So I went to have the interview and I sat down with this man called Avikal and he asked me some things and I answered and I don't know, he must have seen the film glaze go over my eyes because he said to me, you don't want me to tell you anything about this, do you? I said, not really. I said, I just know I'm in the right place and I just want you to say yes so I can go pay for my group. And it was a 7 day experience where you work with koan practice. So there's two people on a mat and everybody in the room starts on the same koan, tell me who is in. And the structure is take the koan inside with the intention of having a direct experience, open and communicate whatever you find. So you're either on the mat, totally keeping eye contact with the person on the end of your mat, but you have no interaction. You are there in your space and they're in their space. You ask them the koan, a little bell rings after 5 minutes. Thank you, partner. Change partners, they ask you the koan. This goes on for 40 minutes. And then you are given more instruction. Uh, Move your body, drink some water, go to the toilet, come back when you hear the bell, leave your space as if nobody has been there. And that goes on from 6 in the morning till maybe 10 at night. And there are three active meditations in between, and of course, a very cleansing diet, no sugar, no coffee, no nothing that can interfere with the process of the seeker. And you're in silence and isolation unless you're on the mat. All the mirrors are covered. Nobody wears makeup or perfume. Men don't shave. It's a very tight, structured container. So you can imagine that it also creates absolute freak out in many different moments until you start to realize actually it's built like this so that all your energy is for the search. So I said yes to that. And when I went in the room, it was just like, I'm home. I didn't even need to sit on the mat for the first experience. I just knew, oh, I'm home. And the first time I did, there's a dynamic meditation, that's famous in Osho world. And the first time I did dynamic, I thought, okay, these people are all absolutely crazy, because the second part of dynamic is catharsis, so I'm in this huge room, like there's like 80 people going crazy, yelling and hitting pillows and going off but it's catharsis. It doesn't have to be like that. And I'm completely ecstatic. And I'm thinking, wow, this is day two. Day one, I'm thinking, what have I done to myself? I must be, this is nuts. What's going on here? By day two, I'm ecstatic. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm so in love with everybody in this room. And love is just pouring through me. It's like, oh, this is the zoo and I'm an animal. I'm in the zoo. This is and here is the freedom of full expression to, but you don't touch anybody, you don't interact with anybody, you're just in your own space, whatever is there, whether it's yelling or jumping up and down or laughing or whatever is being expressed, there's your 15 minutes for that expression. And it was like, wow, this was just, I'd never seen anything quite like it that just lit me up like a little Christmas tree. And I just fell in love just in the most ecstatic way. I can't say it differently. It went from, oh my God, what is this? To, oh my God, what is this? And I just knew, oh, again, that was the third time. This is my work. And I mean, I just sat on the mat and I was in. There was no question about who am I. It was just so clear that all of the conditioning fell on the floor. So those are the three things that I like to present because all the other things that I've explored in my life fell away because to me, these three things are dear to my heart. And for me, they're doors to absolute liberation. Not only, um, you know, they're doors to actualization in this lifetime. And for me, that's important to go all the way home, not to be stuck halfway up the mountain. If you really want, if you have that deep longing in you to know who am I, then there is, it's like breath. You have to want it like you want breath. And that has been my living truth for a really long time. That's the commitment. And sometimes people find me to be really tough. So there's that, there can be that great softness and tenderness in me, but the deeper the love goes, there can also be tough love. Because ultimately, I will hold anybody in their sorrow or their whatever breakdown they're in. And yet at some point, there's a place where I'm really only here for your consciousness, not to support the story. So sometimes that can feel tough, to depending on what I'm experiencing at the moment. I might, call somebody out, and so then I'm thought of as not kind or rude or whatever. But to me, I was graced in my life by elders who called me out. The Kichwa, Grandmother Kitty, when she came to Australia, I had some experiences with her where she really called me out. We don't have time for you to play this nonsense. Wake up. You're needed. So that's like, so I can see that sometimes I can be perceived in all kinds of ways. And I think that if you're a guide or a presenter or anyone who holds space for another, it's important that to come to realize that you will receive projections and transferences, and it's okay. It's like as long as that authentic reality is present within, and you know yourself that you're really there holding someone. And I'm heard to say in groups, if somebody's triggered, I've said something or behaved in a way and somebody's triggered. And I just think of Osho, who said, I could have compassion for you if you weren't so funny. It's hammering you need, not compassion. You're all the Buddha pretending not to be. And there's sometimes a place in me that is that, how that is perceived is actually from the love and the deep care I have for the breakthroughs and for the possibilities. So if somebody's triggered, I'm delighted. I'm sorry that in that moment they might not like me, but actually, on a higher level, that trigger is such a gift because underneath that is treasure. So I think when we can all arrive at that place, then the gentleness and the patience that Richard has talked about that we hold dear in Gene Keys, the Gene Keys approach of contemplation, inquiry, gentleness, and patience. That's when that really comes into being, where we start to see that how to be kind to ourselves when we are defended or triggered or justifying or when we're just sorrowful or whatever it is. And we can be kind to each other. But at the same time, if I see something that's triggered, there is a wicked child in here that goes, "Oh, great, you're triggered. How cool is that?" And of course, depending on the situation, I will hold that person as long as they need, in my mentoring programs or in groups or whatever, but they're not in any doubt that we're holding until there's a moment where it stops being about the other or the blaming or the shaming or the they did it or running away from yourself in some moment. And your Richard talks about the pivot, in his art of contemplation, The energy goes out. She did it, she said it, they did it, it's the government, whoever. But in some moment, the energy turns in, and that's the pivot. And that's the moment where we can pause and take a breath and see that all our energy is outside. And I can't do anything if my energy is all outside. And to me, there's first of all the contemplation is like this horizontal contemplation, but something happens in the pivot where that inquiry starts to go vertical. Suddenly we have a vertical reality that is going all the way from the ground of being, to the causal plane, and there's an alignment that is possible and starts to open for us, which I think is quite exquisite. So that's a lot from me. I can't believe that you actually wanted me to speak about all this, but that's been the journey. And here we are, we're, I guess, I've been at least 40 years or more in this game of awakening, and the gentleness that is knowing that I can only be aware of what I'm aware of in the moment, and that there's more unknown than known. And that's a kind of gentle humility that happens by itself.
Hmm.
The journey just becomes more ordinary.
Yes, yeah, I think that's such a wonderful thing about the Gene Keys, that this allowing, accepting, and embracing, but the ordinariness of, because if you really think about it, everything is ordinary, isn't it? Even this, the sun is ordinary because there's billions and billions.
Completely. I I remember the first time I was in a supermarket in Scotland, and I'm there with I used to do a big shop because we had acreage and horses. And so, I would go and do this big shop, and I was pushing this trolley, and all of a sudden I don't know how this even happened, from something I was reading, and not, it's like I used to read stuff and also not really know about it in some way. It was curious. But I'd had this, I didn't know to call it contemplation or whatever at the time, but I had this thing about chopping wood and carrying water. And all of a sudden I'm pushing this shopping trolley, and I'm like, oh, chopping wood and carrying water, and this these pieces kind of opened up in me over time, where suddenly there was oh, chopping wood and carrying water. It was just one of those curious things of before enlightenment and after enlightenment. And then this whole notion of enlightenment became a joke somehow, became this great idea in the mind, something you have to reach for, or um, something that's going to take you 30 years to understand, or maybe 1700 lifetimes, and I don't know, maybe I've lived 1700 lifetimes, which is why in some moment with your shopping trolley suddenly came this exquisite experience of ordinariness in this chopping wood and carrying water. It was just a beautiful thing. And this was going on long before I started to realize that this was actually vocational, and I was living it, or I was taking these little baby steps towards something that would take shape in my life in the way that it has. And I think that's a great thing to realize, is you're always on your path. Even if you think you're lost, or you've had bad behavior, or you've been criticizing yourself, and maybe you've been alcoholic or a drug addict, or you've been all of these, you've experienced all of these things. We measure them, one's better and less than the other. No, they're simply experiences. And in some moment there comes that place of going, oh, where we want to know something else. And then there needs to be compassion and gentleness and patience and forgiveness for our journey, wherever it has been, because without all of it, you would never be here right now. So I think that's a really important thing to realize, that it doesn't matter where you've been or what path you've been treading. The question is, what's happening right now? Your past doesn't define you. You might have amends to make. You might have a sorrowful heart. You may have regrets. But over time, those can heal also. Where there's can be remorse that, for me, I can say I've had a lot of remorse that I couldn't have been more aware 30 years ago.
I am curious, and I think people would love to hear you share, Tanmayo, about. I was listening to the philosopher Alan Watts. One time he said, like, we have this expression coming into the world, but really it ought to be coming out of the world. Because we're coming out of our mother's womb, etc. What was your impression of the world, of Earth, of planet? What what was it like for you, and what did you make of it all?
Well, first of all, I thought I've landed in the wrong planet. This can't be right. This can't be the game. I think that was the impression of when I was very small and I couldn't understand what I felt coming from someone, what I saw in their face, and the words that were being spoken. It felt like there's no alignment. It's like it was very confusing in my body. Um, so I think I felt confused a lot of the time, and I didn't understand, you know, my grandmother and my grandfather, they were children who left school when they were like 11 and 13. And yet they were extraordinary beings. And today we would put a label to what they were as far as tradition is concerned. And there were people who moved with the seasons, and they were totally in touch with nature. So my grandmother's family were fishing folk, and my grandfather's family were farming folk. So they came from those kind of backgrounds, but hard things that happened in their childhoods. But they were very connected in different ways. So I remember being very small, maybe 4 or something like that, and it was a very unusual experience because my grandfather had an allotment, and generally nobody did anything on a Sunday, and which my grandfather thought was very funny because it didn't mean anything to him. But he would adhere to it because my granny would say, no, no, it's Sunday. But we were in the allotment, and there was kind of this big wall, and we could see these people going to church and sort of frowning that, my grandfather was in the allotment. And my grandmother is sort of giggling, which was weird because, she didn't usually do things like that. And I'm going, Granny, what's going on? And she said, well, I'll t she said this in Doric, of course, not in English. She said, but what she said was, if those folk can't find God all week, they're nae going to find him in a steen house on a Sunday. So if those people cannot find God all week, they are not going to find him in a stone house on a Sunday. And that really, I remember it as if I'm still there hearing those words, because already by that stage, there was a curiosity that was going on around, people would get dressed up in their Sunday best and their Sunday hat, and they would go to church. They were always very stern. And I would think, I don't understand. It didn't make any sense to me. And then, of course, I wanted to go to Sunday school, and I went to Sunday school, and pretty soon I was a disruptive force in the class. And then suddenly not really allowed to teach Sunday school because I was too controversial. I was 12 by that time because none of it made sense. And these people that were so, supposedly Christian, I started to understand the difference between pious and righteousness. And I would see these people being horrible to each other unto other people all week. and then be these so-called upstanding citizens in the community. And that was very disturbing as a child. It was disturbing to my being. It was like, what kind of planet is this? Doesn't make any sense. Or there was, or cruelty to animals, or, and of course, as I grew up, it became, I was very fortunate. My mother, a very young mother, she was 17 when I was born. So during the 60s, when a lot was happening in the 60s, I was receiving a lot of what she was busy with in the 60s. So that's things, some things started to realize there's a revolution somehow going on, with flower power and, different things, like JFK and Martin Luther King, and lots of things were happening. And there was like these possibilities, and then there was the door closed sharply on the possibilities. So it was disturbing to me. And then, of course, over time, I came to realize, well, we're all in this morphogenetic field, and it has to do with resonance somehow. And how do I want to spend my life in conspiracy theories with them and us? Somehow something happened during some meditation somewhere, I don't know where, some moment of recognition of there is no them and us, there is no me and them. And that was wild in a sense to me. And I remember first talking about it many years ago, and people thinking, yeah, we know she's a little odd, and she's becoming more odd now. But there is that sense of it still for me, that I sometimes think the Earth is really, it is some kind of school. I feel like that it's the only planet of choice, if you like. All these beings from around the galaxy are already here. We don't have to wait for them to turn up. I think they're all already here. But as I kind of moved in the world, and I start to see people that I can often see the auric field, and I could see that for some people, there is no connection between, let's say, the second chakra and the rest of the chakras. There's no threads to kind of get there. Either that, or there's so much emotion, that's also tribal, and the solar plexus is about power over, but the heart opening, or the connection to the higher mental plane has not formed yet. It's not there in the subtle field. So I realized, oh, this is maybe how this happens on this planet. Maybe there are just this waves of beings that are coming in to experience life and form, and over time, these different aspects of being start to open and flower, where it stops being about me and mine and ownership and them and us. And suddenly the heart opens, and there's the channels up the center start to have more potency and awareness, and access to the higher mental starts to inform, and the higher harmonic starts to take place. And I think that's what the inner journey does also, or something happens for people where suddenly it stops being about me and mine, and my tribe and my town and my country and my flag, and my color and my sexuality and my politics, and something moves in us. But it was painful, actually, when you ask that question. And I felt a lot of the time that I was kind of just behaving in ways that were expected. And at the same time, there was an incredible rebel in me.
I'm always wondering what the the 60s were like, kind of, and but what kind of inspirations came to you? You've given so much of these insights you've had, and of knowing who you are and what your journey is, kind of on the path. when you were growing up, what was your inspirations and what kind of music, etc.? What was it? What what
And
was inspiring you?
the first thing that comes to me when you ask that question, I was very disappointed in church. I was very disappointed and I loved going to Sunday school, all the kids and these sweet teachers and we used to have picnics in the park and things like that. But I was as I became even 10, 11, and 12, it's something was wrong. It was a bit like something's wrong in the state of Denmark kind of thing. Something's not right here. But I think I was in the first year of secondary school, and we had this locum teacher, and she was quite young. And we used to still have religious education at school at that time. And she was our RE teacher. And I had only ever been introduced to things from the Bible, but she introduced us to books. And this book, I think it's called The Cross and the Switchblade. And it's a story about a minister in the USA who had a very comfortable parish. And he started to have this guidance, this vision that he was to go to New York and he was to go to Harlem. And he thought, oh, that doesn't make any sense. But of course, he realized that he was being inspired by the divine and guided there, and he did. And he became a minister at a time where, there was what they called rumbles. All these gangs were fighting and killing each other. And he was one of the few people of a Caucasian heritage that was in that part of town. And so he took on his ministry there. And it touched me so deeply. It's like and the other thing that touched me really deeply was when I read um, Thomas More when I was at school. I had to read Thomas More. Those things were like manna from heaven, like there was hope. They gave me hope. And people like, you know, JFK and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela, all of these things gave me hope, and John Lennon gave me hope, and um the Rolling Stones gave me hope. They rocked the world, that was Jimi Hendrix was just like, oh my God, just listening to him play a guitar was just like, that's raw, pure, naked potential that is there, that's just like wow. Or and I don't know, Live Aid and Queen and all of these various things touched me in very deep ways. But at school, it was those two things, I think, and I was very lucky to have that RE teacher who I've long since forgotten her name, but that book and what she presented really touched me. Suddenly, there was something beyond the church. It was like, it was almost for me, I needed to take God out of the church. I mean, I know that we could get in a big discussion about what that really means, but for me, it was like I need a direct route to the divine, God, Goddess, the inner beloved. It put me on a trail, a quest, really, that I need the experience for me. And I'm not interested in beliefs. I need direct experience. I need to taste it, embody it, feel it, touch it. And that experience nobody can take away from me. And that to me is embodiment. Embodiment is, we start with information, we gain knowledge along the way, and at some moment we're presented with an extraordinary experience. And in that accepting the experience, there comes this embodied wisdom through the lived experience of what that is. So sometimes people ask me, and I say, well, we can, there's story about the strawberry. If you live in the Himalayas, you've never seen a strawberry. I can tell you, oh, it's this little red fruit and it's got a little green stalk, and people make ice cream and jam, and it's really tasty and people love it. And now you know about a strawberry. But until you pick up that strawberry, you put it in your mouth. Now you know, now you have a direct experience of a strawberry. Now, personally, I don't care for strawberries. But when they were in my grandfather's garden, I did. So, and sometimes I'll say, well, you can talk about or learn about an orgasm, but until you've had an orgasm, there is no way that you can have a direct experience. You have no way of knowing, and it's never the same. And that's life, is that how it touches your senses, how it takes your breath away, how that Kundalini energy rises up your spine if you're come to that place in your life, how your toes tingle, or how just a look from someone that that chemistry is alive in, that's a direct experience. So I wanted that with the divine, that full that I don't have any other way to see that, but it's a divine love affair that that touches everything, flowers and trees and humans and even people that I may not like what they're doing, and I will stand to say I'm going to stand for everything that's that seems to be the polar opposite of what you're presenting in the world. But I still don't want to cause them harm. But I will totally live into the experience of love and compassion and sovereignty. And I will defend, if needed, the some other person, being, sentient soul that needs it. It's a little bit like the Zen master, the samurai who comes and tells the Zen master that, he's taking over the monastery, and Zen master sitting on his cushion, and the samurai says, "Don't you realize I'm a person who can chop off your head with one stroke?" And the Zen master says, "Don't you realize I can let you?" Because he has no connection anymore to this body experience. His power is beyond that. So there's something, I don't know, there is this wild love affair that is also deeply compassionate. And I've not been able to have one without the other. It's like people want the passion, but then they only want it the way they want it. And it's like, well, sorry, it doesn't come like that. And that's deep acceptance of what moves in you. Like I've had to come to understand that what is acceptance in the moment of what is, without the criticism of, oh, I should behave differently. What is real and what is reaction? And as far as I can see, it's a life journey, which again brings me back to why I love Gene Keys and the fact that it's life work.
So if we look here at the sphere of life's work, this is what we're gonna you can see, right? We've got so we got the 13 the 13th gene key. So I am an enthusiastic student of the gene keys. I'm by no means it's a new journey. I do love the gene keys. So as Elijah was explaining in our first teamwork together, there is a shadow of each gene key, and that is the victim, the lower frequency. And in this gene key, the 13th gene key, that shadow is discord. It's kind of
Mm.
deep seated pessimism. And then the gift is discernment. And the city or the mystical perfection of this is empathy. And in this sphere, then you have a line 6, which we're going to touch on on what the lines are, but we're not going to go so deep into it. And then, yeah, so the golden path would travel this way, and then over here we'll find the 43rd gene key in the radiance sphere, and that is then the shadow of deafness. And the gift is insight, and the city is epiphany, or this kind of. And I feel that in the conversation we've had, I've already felt the insight and the kind of epiphany and the breaks. This is also keynote to just break through. So then if we look at, yeah, then we can also see that you have the 43rd gene key as well in your what is called the SQ sphere, and you then also have the 13th gene key in your core that then becomes the vocation, and here's a line 3. And then if you look at my hologenetic profile, we can see in my radiance sphere I've got the 13th gene key and a line 1, and then in my core and vocation I got the 43rd gene key and a line 1. So there was a little bit of a some themes for us to touch upon. If we begin with the life's work, then and having the 13th gene key there and a line 6.
I think the biggest thing for me are about the 13. I mean, you touched on it when you talked about the pessimism. And of course, the line 6 can get really caught up in disappointment. So can be disappointed by the state of the world, which we talked about a little bit already. And that can lead to this discord. And there's the 13 kind of looks back. So if you think of the 13 and the 7 as programming partners, it's like the 7 looks to the future and the 13 looks to the past, but they're also embedded in each other. And the 13 can get, because it holds collective memory, it can get really stuck in the collective memory. And one of the things I hear people saying again and again, oh, it's never going to get any better. It's always been like this and it's always going to be like this. And it's like, it's a terrifying thing for me, to think that, oh my God, please don't let that be true. Somewhere we, as a collective, as a group of humans, I feel like although it appears at the moment that there is so much discord in the world, there is also so many beautiful, amazing, innovative things that would invite optimism. And I think that that needs our listening. And I think that is the gift of the 13. It listens. And it's listening in a way that, like Richard writes about it, in a way that is the 13 listens through love. But it is this, and it also has a relationship with the 30, so the desire of the 30, can work in two ways. It can keep us stuck in really shadowy kind of vibrations. But that desire is also can also be the desire for the light, the desire for communion, the desire for empathy, the desire to discern what is it that I really need for me, and what is going to how can I contribute to this field of love? I think that that's a, a big piece in the 13, and it's also known as the fellowship of man. So, when I was telling you about falling in love with the craziness of dynamic meditation, for me that is the 13 in its fullness, is not falling in love with humanity because everybody's behaving in a loving way and everybody's kind to each other. No, it's like falling in love with the assortment of beings that are choosing to be on this path whilst they're willing to go through their own personal traumas and dramas and whatever, and also to fall in love with life. I feel like sometimes the fellowship is falling in love with life, and life produces everything that we see. And I feel there is so much awareness arising on the planet and so much innovation. And, there are days where, for me, for example, it's incomprehensible that we allow these huge trawlers to do what they're doing in the ocean. I mean, I was born in a fishing town in the northeast of Scotland. My father went fishing. I used to watch these tiny fishing boats in the winter time traverse these huge waves and somehow make it into the harbor. And to imagine that we have these, to me, deeply offensive things in the oceans, and that we can allow it as a humanity is just incomprehensible. Or walking along a street, like I've spent quite a bit of time in Hong Kong, um, and all you see is baskets and baskets and baskets of shark fin. And it hurts me actually physically to see that. It's like, and yet that's true, but I also can't find fault with the person that's 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 their wares on the footpath. That's the evolutionary process that community is going through. And is it any different in anything to do with eating animals? I don't know, but I think that um, we're growing wheat to feed cattle that feed a small proportion of the world. This doesn't compute to me. And then situations are created where, um, because the farmers are not well cared for either. The land is not cared for. The land's not allowed to lie fallow. The land doesn't get to recover. All of these things, could create for that 13 pessimism and disappointment for the 6. And yet today it's more like the fellowship is looking to arise out of this world of division, which is the programming partner, the 7th gene key. It's like I either foster division or I listen to the guidance, which tends to foster something else, optimism for humanity. So that's my little 2 cents for what it is. And if I take it to the 43, like if I'm not listening, then I can become deaf, the deafness of the 43. So not only am I deaf to myself, so if it means I'm not listening, which is the 13, which means I can't hear the guidance of the 7. So I've become deaf. So where's my insights or epiphanies? The likelihood is that I'm also then in the 23 shadow, can't find my way to simplicity. It's easy to see how these all fuel each other. But if I'm listening, I start to go, oh, hang on, wait a minute. And deafness is curious because, we know that it's about listening within and that the 43 listens beyond the normal places anyway. They're listening to their own distant drummer. And at the same time, I started to notice that in that listening, and I've told this story before, but it just is such a potent one for me, is my ex-husband uh, was complaining about the home that we lived in. And he just kept moaning and groaning about this house. And at the same time, we had just moved to Australia and we had a 7-day business. And I was literally at 4 in the morning, I was getting up, getting dressed, getting ready. I had to go to the baker, get all the things from the bakery, bring them to the shop, pack all the things in them away, and then pack the fridges and open the doors. And then at night, I was closing the doors at 7 and doing the books and coming home. And the only thing I was interested in was throwing off my clothes and getting in the one thing about this house that I loved was this amazing swimming pool. And I would just throw myself in that swimming pool and do a few laps, along with my Scottish Terrier, who used to jump on a boogie board and get in the pool with me, and then, go to bed and start again the next day. And he kept moaning about this house. I'm thinking, God, he's on about that again. And then suddenly one day, something happened. And, that's long before the stories of the other things I'm telling you about. And I looked at him and I said, Are you unhappy in this house? And he went, Oh my God, I've been telling you for weeks, blah, 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 blah. And I said, Actually, you have never said that. All I hear is complaining. But I started to realize I needed to listen beyond the words, beyond the complaint, to realize, oh, I'm not hearing him. I'm hearing, but I'm not listening. And suddenly it penetrated through the deafness. The house was on the market the next day. It's like, Stuart, you just needed to say you were unhappy in this house. I said, actually, you've never said that. And then I realized I needed to hear feeling words. And there were no feeling words. There was just this constant moaning and groaning that I just kind of just, I'd no time for it until suddenly I thought, oh, I wonder what else I'm not listening to that I'm deaf to because it doesn't fit in my perception of the world in this moment. I don't have the bandwidth to listen to it right now. And I think that really assisted me to listen to others of very different perceptions and opinions than me, but hear them maybe even at a deeper level than the words that are being spoken. So that there is quite a connection there between that 13:7 and 43:23, I feel, to get to the quintessence of it. What's really being spoken and what am I listening to?
The discernment and the insight. So we got the 13th, 6, and then the programming partner, as you were saying, the seventh gene key, that is the shadow of division
Mhm.
and the gift of guidance and the city of virtue. And if you look at my profile here, then the programming partner, then the 13-1 is programmed with the seventh one
Mm.
here in my sphere of purpose, and then I also got the seventh one into my sphere of attraction.
Mm.
And then in your profile, yeah, so the 13, 6, 7, 6, 43, 2, and then as you were speaking about the 23rd gene key, which is the shadow of complexity
Mm.
and the gift of simplicity, and then the city or perfection of um, quintessence. Um, yeah, so
Yeah.
the times we're living in, all those shadows are there, and then allowing that and the breakthroughs. I feel this conversations already have been so full of breakthroughs. It's quite extraordinary. Can you just explain a programming partner?
Well,
Six
if you
and
look if you look at them on the wheel, like there's the wheel of life, and all of the 64 keys are around the wheel. So at the time of at the time of your birth, that's like the sun is shining, for example, in the 13, and the earth is on the other side. That's the programming part or the polarity in a way. But it's like yin and yang. So the earth is the programming partner. So they have sun earth relationship for us in the activation sequence. So they're nested in each other. I often think of them as yin and yang. That's like they cannot be separated. But for language, when we're learning, we talk about one or we talk about the other. But actually, none of what is in this hologenetic profile is separate. but it takes time to see. And very often in the beginning, we get to see how we can cascade into all of the shadows. And it's very important that to realize that we need to be listening to how we talk to ourselves. This inner critic, this self-talk, how we put ourselves up or put ourselves down, that inferior, superior judge within that is it's sometimes talked about as the uh, voices of the authority figures. That we think we've left them all behind, but they're happily, entwined in here. And they sound so logical. And this can be such a trap. And we can be attacking ourselves internally. And if you think about the 13, each of the 64 keys has a relationship with an amino acid. And the 13, I think it's glutamine, isn't it? And the physiology is the amygdala. So we start to see if we need to support our internal dialogue also, not only if we have the 13, but any key that we have or any moment to really hear what is my inner narrative? How am I supporting my well-being? Um, or am I getting caught up in this critic that is either, you know, inferior or superior? And then noticing how anything that I disown, I might judge in another. It's just another way of noticing how that inner judge or that inner critic works. So, and it can very much, we can become victims to our own inner criticism, without it needing to be coming from anywhere else. So we need that witnessing, that awareness to really pay attention to how we are supporting ourselves inside. I think that's an important piece for the journey. And for Venus, I really feel like um, it's to recognize anything in the emotional body, there is a need to start to understand something about the inner judge and its subtleties. It's very subtle in how it frames. It's not going to give up so easily. The thing is, it's never in present time. It's either in the future or in the past, and it's always comparing. So like I could sit here and think, oh my God, I feel like we've just wandered all over the place in this podcast. And I'm sure Elijah will have been very clear and structured and everything that he said. So then that's the judge comparing. So there's this comparison that goes on all the time. And it's good to remember that I'm not Elijah. You know, he has different gifts than me. I can talk about lines all day, every day, but Sven didn't ask me about that because Elijah already did all of that. But there's that comparing. And very much in this culture, we were taught, somebody's better or somebody's more successful or somebody's more creative, thinner, taller, more beautiful, more masculine, more feminine, more, this is all the nature of the inner critic. And to learn to disengage from that is quite a potent part of the journey, or it has been for me. And it's something that I really offer in all of my groups for this to be something to just notice and pay attention to. And because that then becomes the spiritual ego, this the super ego, the spiritual judge now. Oh yes, well that wasn't very spiritual, was it? So you can't get out of the loop of the blessed thing.
Well, that whole what is spiritual and what isn't spiritual. I mean that's another.
Mm,
Yeah, just on the like, I'm also evolving as I don't even know if I can call myself a podcast host, but I was with Elijah, we had quite a lot of structure, and because we wanted to set the foundation for, and I think it's important to have structure for myself, but I also think it's important to have flow. I just would like to touch, and I'm conscious of time and space and all this, and I think we already navigated the time zones between Australia and Europe and etc. And it's gone quite well. I'm very happy. I just want to touch on how we met, Tanmayo, and how a lot of people met with the Gene Keys. You obviously know um, from your wanderings, you met with Richard in with the Venus in 2003, etc. But I had a trigger and I owned my trigger and I sent a message to Richard about my trigger and he put me in contact with you and we spoke and you mentioned the Gene Keys event in London last year in November about the great change and this shift of consciousness that we may be able to feel and discern in the field, and sometimes it can also be quite shaky, isn't it? But how was it for you to? Yeah, you invited me, and that's how we met in person in embodiment. How was it for you to be a part of that event?
in London.
Yeah, in London last year.
It was really interesting actually because, for me, there are times where when Richard's presenting, I often feel like I just want to sit in the room. I feel like I'm just grounded there in a way. Um, what happened for me in London was on a personal level, it never occurred to me. I'm there for him, it's about Richard. And it never occurred to me that all of these people, or the majority of them, know me, and they're all in Venus. And that it was quite shocking, actually, in a body way. There were moments where I felt like the sixth line kind of left the building. It was like it was a little bit overwhelming. I think I hugged 600 people twice. It was just like, wow. It just had never entered my reality that it had anything to do with me. It's about Richard. So that was very moving. And I talked to lots of people, and there were moments where afterwards I thought, did I even speak to some of my friends when I was there? Did I speak to you? Did I? I mean, there are people that I realized that were there, and I thought, I have no memory of actually speaking to individuals because I was surrounded so often with little groups of people, or I would just get a chance to speak to somebody, and the next person would want to speak to me. And I wanted to, be as available as I could be for anybody because I'm there as part of the team to support the community. But I had a sense of it just all seemed to pass by so quickly, and I'm not sure at times did I really spend time, with that person. It was quite extraordinary from that perception. But to sit and listen to Richard was I just felt he was really on form, and I think it was really good that it was not recorded. I think it gave him some kind of relief, in which he did mention more than once, that he was quite pleased that it wasn't for the first time in maybe a really long time. It wasn't recorded. I felt like there was kind of like a pre social media time of relaxation around that when we could just all talk, and it was contained within that space in that room and with these people. So it was very beautiful for me to meet a lot of the team and to meet so many people. I was really touched. And of course, we got some time together as a team, and that was really nice to spend time. And, we went to Avebury afterwards, and Jen and I, who was with events at that time, we went to Bath and we went to Glastonbury and Wells, and that was very special. So I think when I'm anywhere with Richard, It's I'm just so aware of being of service. Um, but as I say, it was it was a little bit overwhelming to realize, oh, um, because I'm behind a screen usually, or so that was a lot somehow. I don't know why, because I'd been in Colorado the year before, but somehow it was more intimate in London in some way. How was it for you, Svend?
Yeah, so I'm on the spectrum of autism, but it did feel like it was like, so I've had my friend Shelley J. Whitehead, who's a dating and relationship coach. She was dreaming about me one time back in, I don't know, but she sent me a message and we connected. It's a long time ago, 2015, I think. And she had always invited me to her house, and I'd never gone. So when you told me about the event, I asked if I could come and stay with her and her husband, and that was very beautiful. And then I was navigating London, which is quite a big energy for me, Londonian, and uh, and I was hearing in the tube, I was hearing when they said something like see it, see it, say it, and sort it. And it was all a bit. I don't know if it's just bad language, but it's if you see something that's out of the ordinary, I think it's kind of, see it, say it, and sort it. I don't know if it's just. It was a lot, and then I felt in the event it was just I had to practice connection with self a lot, but I felt I had a very like strong like Elijah was very like because I didn't even like this is the thing of being on the other side of the screen and I have never had the confidence and courage to raise my voice in the Venus sequence or any of these calls that I participated in. So I didn't know that Elijah would know who I was, but he remembered from a call. It was with Bella Crystal and yourself and Elijah, and I was asking a question about guidance and looking up my late father's astrological chart, or hologenetic profile, these kind of things, and consent, and then yourself. Yeah, it was a little bit. There was just so much going on, and then I had a connection with Richard, which was for me very affirming because. Yeah, with my path, I spent a lot of time in India, and I spent a lot of time on a spiritual, religious path, and yeah, so it was really it was a beautiful experience, and I think it was for me life affirming, and I felt that that shift is palpable in the field, um,
Mm.
and then sometimes I forget for sure the shadow of deafness kicks in, and but yeah, it was a beautiful experience. Venus has been in this call quite a lot, and obviously I know you from the hosting the Venus sequence, and you just set the scene for the exploring the golden path for all of us together. Um, what are your invitations to people in general to join the Gene Keys? What's the best way of exploring the Gene Keys, in your opinion? And
Well, for me, get on the website or buy the book. Lots of people like the audios, and that's really fantastic. If you are somebody who likes reading, I think there's such a lot that can come from the book. It's like you can just open the page and it's like the fairies rewrote it overnight. I'm sure that wasn't there when I read it last time. When you're reading your own keys, something jumps out at you. But I feel like it's very potent to be in a retreat. It might be a bit edgy sometimes for people thinking, what? How long is it? But you know, we used to go away to retreats, go away from our home environment and whatever for a week, for months, depends if we were in India or, you know, and then come home. And this is an opportunity to be your life as a retreat, actually, to be in your life and to see yourself in all of your behaviors on a daily basis whilst you're in that field of contemplation and being supported by a great team and wonderful, wonderful people just like yourself from around the world. I think there is something very potent and I don't think you're only doing it for you. I think your whole lineage is participating. Like you're the one that has stepped to the fore for your ancestors, for those to come, and whether it's your biological lineage or or a mythical lineage, I feel that you're the boots on the ground, that your inner work is the great gift that can be given to the planet at the moment. So to participate in a retreat is a magnificent gift to yourself and to the world, I feel, actually. So, by the online programs, if you start with the activation sequence, it's a beautiful way to start to connect with yourself, with your life work, with the evolution key that's constantly pushing you to evolve and push your edges. What is your radiant light? What is that key that is really there, that archetype sitting there in your radiant light that's so natural that you might not even realize it? And then what is the purpose? And this purpose is what you're bringing to your life all the time. It's not about what you do, it is who you be. So whether you're a barista or a coach or a fisherman, this is a gift that you're bringing. And then how it opens up into the Venus sequence, to that field of partnership and relating and starting to open all the doors of that can start the healing journey from the conditioned self to the essential presence, and then that vocational piece that opens up to the pearl. And the fact that we're going to start this in January for 18 months is I would invite everybody to come on board and you go at your own pace. I mean, really, there's one webinar a month. And if you do nothing else but listen to the webinar, that's an hour and a half a month, maybe. And then there are Q&As and there are community calls, but you can participate as much or as little as you as there for you in your life. But you're always in the field, even if you haven't been on the calls. Or people think, oh, I've missed so much now, I've been busy. You can never miss. The fact that you signed up says something, and then it starts to unravel and unfold. And it's very potent. Venus is potent. And I like to say to people, that it's not for the faint-hearted. It's easy to listen to all of these great teachers that we have in the world today that are full of information and that we want to know what all of these things are. But for true actualization, to really be an embodied being, to experience yourself as a sacred self, needs courage because we are going to be faced with ourselves. And sometimes it's painful. And to hold ourselves gently as we move through that and to have to look at things that were traumatic, perhaps in our past, but to know you're being held in this incredible field and there's people there to support you at any moment. That's pretty special. And to know that actually I need some extra care because of what I'm going through. That's the wisdom that comes from realizing that, we don't wait for our teeth to fall out to clean them. But when it comes to looking into our inner world, we want to put that on the back burner, or maybe I'll do it when. And for me, this is the incarnation for it. Why wait for another one?
Yeah.
If we can the only thing that goes with us, as far as I can see, is consciousness, then I think to dedicate some time in our lives to that is something worthy. So for me, I would say start with activation. But people love Delta and listen to the seven sacred seals or whatever calls to your heart. There's so much in the website, in the synarchy now.
Yeah.
But I feel that the golden path is, we have a book and we have a map and a compass in a way, don't we? But you're the only one that can make the journey. But there are people around, guides that can assist because they've been traversing it for a little while longer. And for me, it's like, well, I only get to sit here because I've fallen down that hole enough times myself, or I've sat at other feet for long enough that I get to sit here. And we can support each other, and we all need a guide. Like in the guides program, I can say something like, look, you go to a restaurant, somebody guides you to your table. You want to climb a mountain, you need a guide if you've never been there before. If you're going to ski down the, Salets, and the mogul field, you might want to have a little bit of guidance before you go to know that if you turn left, you're going to be in a mogul field. So we're looking, we have guidance all the time. So it's still a personal journey, but it's useful at times to have some guidance.
Thank you so much for participating in my initiative here with, I want to brand it like Gene Key's Conversations and Guidance.
Nice.
And please do extend the word to other Gene Key's guides and ambassadors that might appear in this space. If you can put in a word for me, I'd love to. Jesse Chestnut, I've been thinking about in the I Ching. I'd love to have a deeper kind of journey with that. And of course, Richard, if he wants to come here. It's been so wonderful, Tanmayo. So how can people find you if they want to know more about your three vocational loves?
Well, I have a very unattended website that I'm actually in the process of actually doing something about. So you can find me at tanmayo.com, or you'll find me through Gene Keys and through the guides, and but I do have websites that you can find me on.
No, you are very visible in the field, and it's almost like people will find you and the guidance.
Yeah, people find me. I mean, 2 years ago in Colorado unit, Richard asked if I would do a one-day program on love, which I did. And it's been beautiful to see that even 2 years later, people are showing up and saying, I knew that I was going to have a session with you at some point. And often it's some turning point in a life that they think, I'm going to contact her now. So that's always I love sessions. It's a great love of mine. So that is precious to me. So I'm sure Richard will join you if you invite him when he's got a little moment.
I would love that. That would be quite special for me. And so for me, teamwork is really important. And we cannot do anything on our own. Well, we can, but we do need each other, isn't it? And we're not alone on this planet.
And don't you have the 44 in your evolution? Yeah, see, that's totally teamwork, and how we find our soul group or our fractal, however you want to say that. The 44 finds your people. It's very beautiful. Your cosmic friends.
The fractal family.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. Yes, so the Golden Path journey, 18 months with yourself, Richard and
Elijah, and many guests.
Yeah.
many guests. That'll be good.
It seems like one of those, you can refuse the offer, but it seems like an offer too good to miss.
How it feels to me. We're all excited. It's been great. I mean, Richard's excited. He came to see me when I was in Scotland, which was gorgeous, and we spent a couple of days, together, and also working on chemistries and also talking about this next phase. And it is the last time that he will do it like this. There's no question, because he's getting to that stage in his life also where there's other things that he wants to focus on, and particularly I think his writing, and yeah, so it's beautiful. So I think this is an opportunity to really hang out with him during that whole time too, which will be very potent and precious as he's just finished the book, The Sage.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
good to do.
Come on the golden path with all of us. We walk the path together. Thank you so much, Tanmayo.